Let's talk about JavaScript destructuring. Destructuring is a feature in JavaScript that allows you to exploit the structure of a data structure and get values out of it and assign those values to a variable. The traditional way of getting a value out of this array and assigning it to a variable goes like this. Const first writer equals writers index 0. First writer equals Matthew. The destructuring way looks like this. Here's the scaffold. Notice I have the array on this side. I have const. I can put let or var there. And I have what looks like an empty array. When you are destructuring an array, you use brackets. If I wanted to get the value of Matthew out of there and assign it to a variable all in one step, I would do this. Writer1 equals Matthew. Again, it's called destructuring because on the right-hand side, you have a structure. Destructuring is not something you use for integers or strings. It's used for arrays or objects or combinations like arrays of objects. And when you're destructuring an array, you use brackets on the left and the array on the right. The cool thing about destructuring is how efficient it is. Let's say I wanted to get all 4 values out of the array and assign them to 4 variables. Here's my scaffold, A, B, C, D. A equals Matthew, B equals Mark, C equals Luke, D equals John. So what happened there? When you're destructuring an array, you reference your array on the right-hand side, you use brackets, and then on the inside, use whatever variable names you choose, but you have to go in order from index 0 on to the last index. Let me show you what I mean. I put 4 variables in here to correspond to the 4 values in the array. Up here, I put 1 variable in the empty brackets, and JavaScript just knew what to do. It knew that I wanted the first value. But you can do other things, like you can skip indices and get whatever value out of here you want. Let's say I wanted to skip over Matthew and Mark and just get Luke. Use commas as placeholders. Matthew, Mark, and then writer 3. Writer 3 equals Luke. So when you're destructuring an array, reference your array on the right-hand side, empty brackets and variables inside the brackets, but you have to understand that JavaScript goes sequentially from index 0 onto the highest index. You can skip over indices by using commas as placeholders to pluck any value out of here you want. Now let's talk about destructuring an object. The traditional way to get values out of this object and assign them to a variable goes like this. Declare a variable on the left-hand side, assign it to the object, and then use the key that contains the value that you want. First writer equals Matthew. The destructuring way looks like this. Here's the scaffold. With arrays, we use brackets. With objects, we use braces. Reference the object on the right-hand side. Use the braces. Inside the braces, reference the key that holds the value, writer1. Writer1 equals Matthew. Do the same thing, writer2 equals Mark. Notice some differences between object destructuring and array destructuring. First, I use the braces. Second, I have to reference the actual key names. I can't use just any variable name that I want, as I could with arrays. I have to reference the actual key name in order to get the value associated with that key. It is possible to use a custom variable, and I'll show you that in just a minute. One of the cool things, though, about destructuring an object is I don't have to go in order, as I did with arrays. I can pull writer4 right out of the object without using commas as placeholders, as I did with the array. Now, these keys, writer1, 2, etc., that might not be helpful for the program that you're writing. Does object destructuring limit you to using the actual key names? It does not. It's very easy to use custom variable names with object destructuring. I want to get writer3 out of this object, but I want to reassign it and use a custom variable name. Third writer equals Luke. All you have to do is reference the key, use a colon, and then on the other side of the colon, use your custom variable. Just as with array destructuring, I can pull all the variables out in one stroke if I want. I can't press enter here because an error would result, seeing that I've already used writer1, 2, and 3, but you can pull multiple values out of your object with destructuring. Now let's talk about destructuring an array of objects. It's an array, but inside, each item is more than a simple value. If I wanted to get date out of this array of objects, The traditional way would look like this. Declare the variable document date, reference the second index in your array, and then reference the key. 0, 1, 2, label equals date. And sure enough, document date is date. The destructuring way would look like this. Here's the scaffold. The key thing here is not to overthink it. Ultimately, this is just an array, so you want to use brackets. Since there are objects inside of the array, I need to use braces. Now, since it's an array, if I pass it one set of braces, JavaScript assumes I'm wanting values from the first item. When you're destructuring an array, remember that you have to go sequentially from smallest index to greatest. Once I'm inside of those braces, I'm now destructuring this object, the first object. In order to get document number, I simply pass it the key of label. Label equals document number. If you came across this in a piece of code, it would probably be confusing at first. But since we've looked at how to destructure arrays and then objects, you can see that we're simply combining the two techniques here. Let's get amount out of this array of objects. It's in the fourth item, index 3. Its key is label. So with arrays, you have to go sequentially or else use a placeholder. So skip the first object, second, third, fourth object, label. Now we're zeroing in on this label, so we'll get amount. However, let me reference my array of objects. If I pressed enter here, it would throw an error because I've already used label as a variable. So in this case, I'll need to rename it, and we'll call it document amount. Document amount equals amount. Finally, let's talk about destructuring an object with complex items inside of it. If I wanted to get the value of names out of this object, the traditional way would look like this. Names array equals that array. I referenced my object on the right-hand side and its key by dot notation. The destructuring way might seem impossible, but this is just an object, so we're going to use braces. We want the value associated with the names key, so we could do that. Names equals that array. But where it gets more complicated is if I wanted to get Sarah out of this array. I could also do that one of two ways. You see here I've already pulled names out of my object. Names equals this array. I could destructure this array with regular array destructuring. And since I want Sarah, I could skip the first value with a comma, and then we'll just call this Sarah 1. Sarah 1 equals Sarah. But you could do it all in one step. Names, colon, brackets. When I go inside of these brackets, I'm now destructuring this array. But this could be very confusing because earlier we said that when you're destructuring an object, you can use a colon to rename the key. But if you put a colon and then empty brackets, JavaScript just knows how to roll with that. It knows you're referring to the array that is the value of this names key. So now that I'm inside that array and I want Sarah, I can just skip a space and I'll use Sarah. So Sarah equals Sarah. How would I get John Doe out of this nested object? We need to refer to that key of people, colon, we are referring to the object associated with people, and I said I wanted to get person 1, so I do that. Person 1 equals John Doe. And just to show you that it's possible, I could pull everything out. Because I've used person 1 already, let me rename it. No errors. A equals Sally, B equals Sarah, C equals Sigourney, person 1 equals John Doe, person 2 equals Jane Doe. So destructuring can be confusing at first until you get the hang of it, but once you do, I think you'll find it's the preferred way of pulling data directly out of an array or an object.